Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Before we begin, I'd like to note a few logistics. All our attendees are currently in listen-only mode, and following our speaker's remarks, we'll open the webinar up to questions. And throughout the presentations, if you have any questions, please type those into the chat box, and we'll work to address those during the Q&A period. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send a link to registrants after the webinar. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce our four panelists. Today we're joined by Ariel Drehobel. She's a senior research analyst. She's a senior research analyst at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And Ariel's as I said, she's a senior research analyst here at ACEEE. She works on the local policy team, and her work focuses on low-income energy efficiency programs and energy equity. On the call, we also have Brook Pike. Brook Pike is the nonprofit energy efficiency program manager with Energy Outreach Colorado. It's a nonprofit that aims to support all Coloradans in affording their energy needs. Brook has been managing NEET for the past 5 years and worked in the energy efficiency field for 10 years. On the call, we also have Patrick Hanlon. Patrick is the director of environmental programs overseeing much of the programmatic and public-facing side of the city's environmental work. He and his teams have created innovative and national leading programs on pollution reduction and climate change, including today's topic, the Green Cost Share Program. And then finally, we have Isaac Evans. Isaac is a public health specialist and energy contract manager of the city of Minneapolis. Isaac graduated in 2018 with a master's in energy policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. He works as the program administrator, contract manager, and program data analyst for the Minneapolis Green Cost Share Program. I'm now going to hand it over to Ariel to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Maxine. All right. So the webinar today is focused on the topic of how do non-residential energy efficiency programs benefit low-income communities? And the impetus for this presentation is a report that ACEEE published late last year, as well as inviting on a few of the programs that are highlighted in the report that are doing work to reach non-residential customers within low-income communities. So for those of you who aren't aware, ACEEE is a nonprofit research-based organization that aims to advance energy efficiency throughout all sectors of the economy. As Maxine said, I work on the local policy team here, and much of my research focuses on how to advance energy efficiency in low-income communities and how to do so equitably. So on the webinar today, I am highlighting the new report that I mentioned, which builds off of this goal of advancing equitable energy efficiency in low-income communities. So we noticed at ACEEE that there was a research gap in how energy efficiency programs, such as those offered by utilities, federal, state, and local governments, nonprofits, and other implementers, design and implement programs to serve low-income communities outside of residential programs. Most of the emphasis that we saw on energy efficiency programs reaching low-income communities focused on residential customers. But even so, we were aware of programs that aim to address the needs of non-residential customers in these communities. But there wasn't a lot of research we could find that provided an overview of what these programs look like and what examples of implementers are doing within this space. So we decided to fill this data gap by collecting information and summarizing key takeaways from programs that are aiming to serve non-residential customers within low-income communities. And that is what accumulated into this report that we published in November of last year, which you can access on this link here on this page. So the main framing that we used for this research focused around programs that reach community-serving institutions within low-income communities. And for this research, we defined these as organizations that are those that serve community needs, many of which can include those entities that are listed here, such as nonprofits, shelters, community centers, and small businesses. And as I said before, a lot of efficiency programs that target low-income communities tend to be targeted at residential customers. But we believe that it's really important to also reach community-serving institutions with energy efficiency investments, because many of these organizations have experienced a legacy of underfunding and other structural and financial barriers to accessing energy efficiency investments. And energy efficiency programs can help address these inequities while also improving energy affordability and program equity. So on this slide, I have a list of a lot of the barriers and benefits that community-serving institutions can face and experience when they are trying to access or do access energy efficiency investments and improvements. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these right now, but you can learn more about these within the report. And I think it's important to note that there are so many benefits that these organizations, customers can experience by participating in efficiency, and also many barriers as to why it's hard for them to do so. So designing programs that address these barriers and allow them to access the benefits can prove really impactful and bring a lot of value to the program and to the customer participating in it. So for this research, we at ACEEE conducted an online survey to collect information about programs that specifically target low-income communities with non-residential programs. Typically, we found that these were programs that were in utility commercial portfolios or were, kind of reaching customers through that way, but we found a variety of programs through the survey. We were aiming to collect a sample of programs to get a sense of what they look like across different kinds of implementers as well as nationally. So we sent out the survey to our lists at ACEEE back in April of last year, and we collected responses through May. And from this survey, we collected data on 39 programs that met the criteria for what we were looking for, meaning that they were programs that specifically aimed to reach non-residential buildings and community-serving institutions within low-income communities. On this slide, we have some of the high-level trends that we found when we went through and looked at the programs within this survey. I'll note that in the report, we also have tables with program summaries for each of the included programs with information about who they serve, about energy savings, et cetera, and as well as some short write-ups and longer case studies as well. So if you're interested, you can find that information within the report. So some of the main trends that we found were that eligibility requirements and targeting did vary greatly across programs. We found that only 6 of these 39 programs exclusively targeted low-income communities, while the rest used additional incentives or targeting efforts to reach these communities as part of a wider or broader program offering. We found that program implementers used diverse definitions of low-income communities with specific indicators to identify communities to target, which looked beyond just income as an indicator at other indicators as well. We also found that 11 of the programs used building size or high energy use as indicators of organizations or customers to include in programs. So those were requirements for participation. As for measures, we found that lighting and HVAC improvements were the most common, but we also found that some programs did include water measures, and solar was included in a few programs as well, so kind of bridging that gap between efficiency and renewables. Unlike most residential programs that target low-income communities, most of these programs did not cover the full costs of program measures and did require participants to pay some of those costs. About a third of the programs did cover the full costs, but 2/3 did not. We found that 4 of the programs included workforce development goals, which is something that we're seeing more and more efficiency programs and implementers thinking about. And these tended to focus on using diverse vendors or creating local jobs along with the program. We also found that while many state public utility commissions have exemptions or separate rules for calculating the cost effectiveness of low-income residential programs, we found that few of the non-residential programs in this survey had cost effectiveness exemptions or different rules. So this is an area where there's many reasons for why that residential low-income programs may have cost-effectiveness exemptions. Often this is because of the additional benefits that they bring. So that's something that could be considered on this side as well for programs that are trying to serve communities that have been historically excluded. We also found that less than half of the programs included in the survey were able to provide evaluation data specifically for these programs. We do include the data we were able to collect in the report, which shows the average kilowatt-hour savings or therm savings per building. But because there wasn't data for all the programs, we weren't able to necessarily determine the most effective programs based on just energy savings alone. So we really look at many different aspects of the programs as to why they are impactful and potentially leading in the sector. Through our literature review and interviews with program implementers, we also developed a section of the report on strategies to better reach community-serving institutions with energy efficiency programs. At a high level, these include conducting deep and meaningful stakeholder engagement practices, where implementers start early and engage often with those who will be impacted by the programs. Developing partnerships with community-serving institutions on program outreach and design is also really beneficial. Targeting specific types of organizations and creating marketing campaigns and outreach to meet their needs also proves important and is something that many programs said that they aim to do. Some program implementers also use community-focused qualifications in order to identify participants to enroll in their programs. And these are indicators, as I mentioned earlier, that look beyond just income, that identify communities in need of investments, such as looking at graduation rates, housing vacancy, unemployment, and other factors as well. So this is a way to have a more comprehensive way of looking at where to target resources and efforts. The last part of the report discusses some policy considerations for both local, state policymakers, and also program implementers who want to better reach community-serving institutions with efficiency programs. These include actions such as conducting a needs assessment in order to establish a baseline of savings potential from programs that would target community-serving institutions and non-residential buildings. So finding out first, are these buildings and organizations currently underserved by programs? And if they are, what would be the possible savings or other benefits that could be achieved by better serving them? Once these results are analyzed, program implementers can determine if they should change their programs to better reach these organizations. State-level policymakers can also consider setting goals or requirements to help programs be more equitable and accessible by expanding cost-effectiveness criteria, as I mentioned, which can be done by using an adder for the cost-effectiveness calculation, adding in additional benefits to the equation, or exempting programs from the need for meeting cost-effectiveness requirements. State and local governments can also work to allow for robust financing mechanisms and incentives to be offered for community-serving institutions, while also addressing split incentives and setting diversity targets for buildings for building up the clean energy workforce. So the key takeaways that I want to leave everybody with today, after doing this research, there are a few things that stood out to me. The first being that we found that program implementers who want to develop programs to serve the needs of community-serving institutions and other non-residential customers in low-income communities must decide if they want to create specific, separate programs to meet these needs, or if they want to use additional incentives or targeting efforts within their existing programs in order to reach this target group. There are pros and cons of both methods. A standalone program could have higher administration costs, but also could allow for better targeted and impactful program design. And we lay out some of these pros and cons within the report as well. We also found that stakeholder engagement really is key in order to determine what type of program should be offered, whether specifically targeting it towards low-income communities or certain types of organizations, such as nonprofits, schools, or small businesses. Engaging with those who you want to reach during the planning process for the program is really crucial to ensuring that you design a program that will work best for those who you want to be reaching. We also found that the way that utilities and states identify target communities is very diverse. In the appendix of the report, we include a section on qualification criteria that 16 states use in order to identify, often they call it distressed communities or distressed areas. And often these criteria are looking at different factors beyond income to identify where resources should be placed. And again, this is looking at unemployment rates, income, education, housing vacancy, race, ethnicity, population, as well as income as factors. So these definitions allow for more targeted efforts to reach communities that have been historically overlooked with energy efficiency programs in the past. And they look beyond just income in terms of identifying need. So policymakers and program implementers can explore if their state or locality has a qualification like this already in place for identifying target communities, and they can then use that in their program design. And if not, they can consider creating one of their own that meets the needs of what they're looking to accomplish with their programs. And then lastly, it's also important to note that policymakers and program implementers can really influence the success of these programs. Policymakers have many tools available to ensure that efficiency programs reach non-residential customers and that they're successful, such as enabling financing and also allowing for benefits to be included in cost-effectiveness analysis. Implementers also have many decisions to make about how best to reach these community-serving institutions. And again, the more stakeholder engagement and targeted planning that they're able to do, the more successful that programs can be. So I'm going to stop here, and now I plan to turn it over to highlight two of the programs that we include as case studies in the report. So first up will be Brook Pike, who's with Energy Outreach Colorado's nonprofit energy efficiency program. And hopefully these will provide some deeper dives into what these programs can look like, and what some of the challenges and successes are in terms of running a program to meet these community needs. So with that, I will turn it over to Brook.
Thanks, Ariel. So yes, as Ariel mentioned, I'm Brook Pike. I work at Energy Outreach Colorado, and I'll be talking to you today about our nonprofit energy efficiency program, or NEEP. Last night when I was practicing, my 5-year-old made a game out of how many times I said the word nonprofit. So I guess that's a spoiler alert. The word will be used a lot, but that is the purpose of the program. So I'll jump right into it and tell you a bit more about the organization that I work at, Energy Outreach Colorado. So Ariel, if you want to advance 2 slides. Thank you. And so EOC is a Colorado nonprofit. We were started 30 years ago with the mission of ensuring that all low-income community members of Colorado can meet their home energy needs. And so the core and where we first started was with our bill payment assistance program, and that program is focused on getting people caught up who have fallen into arrearages on their utility bills. That program was really meant to support people in their time of crisis, and we expanded an offering around that for home furnace repair. And so those 2 programs, like I said, really focus on people having very immediate needs that need to be addressed, but then we expanded upon those programs to look at how can we make those utility bills and those energy costs more cost-effective and more affordable. And so out of that grew our energy efficiency programs. And so we have programs that focus on single-family residents, multifamily buildings, and nonprofit agencies. Further, looking at to make those bills affordable, we have been growing our solar subscription program, all with the long-term goal of looking at the customer in a full circle of how to make the bills more affordable. We also offer energy and behavior change education. And so after we go into a home or multifamily building, how can the people that are in those buildings or homes be interacting with the equipment to see any additional energy savings? And then finally, we are also very active in the state legislature and also at the Public Utility Commission to advocate for these types of programs, but also being the voice of the low-income community when any bills are up for consideration. So let's advance the slide, and I'll talk a bit about how NEEP came into conception. So in the early 2000s, Energy Outreach Colorado was noticing that the nonprofits where people were going to receive our bill payment assistance, those nonprofits themselves were having trouble staying in their own buildings, partially because of high utility costs. This is a time when gas in particular was much more expensive. And so the idea of a nonprofit energy efficiency program grew out of this nonprofit displacement that was occurring. And the program was initially funded through private fundraising from EOC and then also a grant from a local foundation. And the overall purpose or premise of the program is that month after month, if the utility bills are more affordable, then the nonprofit can repurpose those saved dollars each month into supporting their low-income programs, the services that they provide, and other priorities within those nonprofits. And so about 2 years after, in 2008, the Denver Office of Strategic Partnerships recognized NEEP and started to fund it as a program. This coincided with the Colorado Public Utility Commission mandating that all investor-owned utilities, as part of their demand-side management programs, have a low-income offering. And so the following year, EOC applied for and won the RFP to be the implementer for the Xcel Energy low-income programs. And then over the next several years, and finishing in 2017, EOC became the implementer for all of the investor-owned utility low-income programs in the state of Colorado. So now we can go to the next slide. And so for a nonprofit to be considered for NEEP, the majority of their programming has to support the low or limited income community, and they have to be a 501c3, own or have a long-term lease of their building, and pay their utility bills. So those last two requirements are theirs to ensure that the nonprofit is getting the benefit of the program. So if the nonprofit, for instance, wasn't paying their utility bills, if they had them in some way subsidized, then the monthly savings they would not be a beneficiary of. And so that is one of the core requirements of the program. And so let's go to the next slide. And as we're thinking about nonprofits and the people who work there, there's some specific considerations for that segment. They're unique in that staff members are often asked to do numerous jobs, many tasks throughout the day. Energy efficiency is not top of mind, nor are there likely experts in energy efficiency or possible programs that can help support them in making building upgrades. There are limited cash reserves available to pay for the new equipment that they might be considering above what the rebate will offset that they would get through the standard DSM or efficiency programs. They're also nonprofits, so they're mission driven. They have every dollar is often prioritized for service delivery and not for the maintenance of the building. And so there's just competing priorities for all of the budget dollars. And when that happens, understandably, there are existing health and safety concerns that often come from years of deferred maintenance just because the priority has not been on maintaining the buildings. And then also another consideration for staff or the mentality, We're serving people at their most vulnerable time or in crisis. So again, the needs of the building and the comfort and the air quality, those are going to fall second to serving people and meeting them at their time of need. And so let's move on to the next slide and talk a bit more. Out of understanding the uniqueness of working with nonprofits, the program has grown and evolved to try to touch on each of those difficulties that do exist within working with a nonprofit. And truly the main one that we see is financing and time. And so going through NEEP, we manage the project from the initial building assessment straight through until the inspection. And everything associated with the program is offered at no cost to the customer, with the exception of sometimes asking for a contribution towards the new equipment. And so we offer a free assessment where we go into the building and take an inventory of all the existing equipment and then make a proposed list for what might qualify for an upgrade. And that proposed list does take in consideration the priorities of the organization, but also the equipment type that we think will have enough energy savings to justify an investment to do that replacement. Once we have the proposed equipment list, we call in one of the contractors that regularly works with our program or that has an existing relationship with the nonprofit, and we ask them to provide bids and spec sheets, identifying what specific equipment we're going to propose go into the building along with the associated costs. We take that information then, from the contractors, the bids and the spec sheets, and we fill out all of the utility rebate submission paperwork that's needed, or in some cases, we do the energy savings calculations in-house. And so we perform those and package together funding for the project with the identified new equipment that has been funded. We then go into contracting, where we manage all of the contracting for the organization to the contractors, set up all the logistics around when the installations will take place. We handle all the payments to the contractors, again, because the nonprofits don't often have that cash on hand. And then once the installation is complete, we perform an equipment verification to ensure that the equipment that was identified for funding was installed. And so all of this is available to the customer at up to no cost to them, paying for material and labor costs up to 100%. And that's available on a statewide effort, partially through utilities, local cities, and then private EOC fundraising efforts. And so next we will look at common items that can be replaced through NEEP. Lighting is often the most cost-effective and the most consistent throughout all of the projects that we do. When we are looking at larger cost items such as HVAC, as I mentioned before, sometimes there will be a request of the nonprofit to contribute, but it is not a requirement. It just might mean that that less cost-effective item might not be able to be installed. Let's move on to the program design. If you're thinking about the program through a utility lens, the incentives should be higher. Like I said, we've tried to fund everything at close to 100%. So of course the program costs are going to be higher. This can be offset through a modified TRC that has a net energy benefit adder. Through our advocacy this past year, we were able to increase the NEB that we use from 0.5 to 0.5, and so that's really affecting the cost effectiveness. We also, as Ariel mentioned, our programs don't necessarily have to be cost effective, though we do strive to make them as cost-effective as we can while still meeting the mission and the intention of the program. This NEEP also addresses concerns of equity that are often accompanied by demand-side management programs. Most nonprofits and low-income community members can't participate in the DSM programs because they can't cover the cost difference between the rebate that is available through standard market prescriptive programs and the actual cost of the new equipment. And so this type of programs helps to address that concern. It also affects the overall energy affordability of those bills and leaves the nonprofit less likely to fall into arrearages. NEEP is part of the overall DSM portfolio for the investor-owned utilities that we work with, and so our low-income programs are contributing to those overall DSM goals, and then, of course, also leading for the reduced need for any new generation or new power plant building. Programs overall to just bring a sense of community goodwill and overall benefit in the customer eye. I so often, as I explain where all the funding comes from, people are just shocked that Xcel Energy or Black Hills Energy are willing to invest in their organization enough to pay for everything at 100% for them. And so there's a lot of benefit in the lens of the ratepayers that is seen. As more and more utilities now are also looking into investment in renewables, they are often mandated to have a low-income subscribership. And so by having these low-income programs already in place, in addition to what might exist in residential, you have a good pool of candidates that then can be supported further by the other utility programs through renewables, and primarily we work with solar subscriptions. And then overall, it's a consideration that a utility is able to reach their most vulnerable customers. And so a lot of the individuals that are going to these nonprofits for services either were or perhaps will be in the future customers and paying into these programs. And so while they're not a direct beneficiary or recipient of those rebate dollars through NEEP, they are an auxiliary beneficiary, and it is a true way to make sure that utilities are touching all of their customers. And so let's go and think about beyond kind of energy savings, the KWH in terms, the benefit of NEEP. And overall, when we look at the new equipment upgrades and partnering those projects with our behavior change program, we see on average 15% lower monthly utility bills. And so that's money that's freed up to go into program delivery. And so what does that mean to the nonprofit? And when we have our orientation throughout the year with the new nonprofits that we're going to work with, we encourage them to think about what does it really mean to you to save that 15%? How many more meals can a food pantry serve? How many more beds can a homeless shelter offer? Is there any part-time employee that you can make full-time with benefits? And so what is that translation going to be for you, and what's that going to mean? The nonprofits now are also, once they go through the program, more likely to remain in the community and close to the people that they serve. Their building now has newer equipment, so if they were doing some capital planning, they can redirect those dollars elsewhere within their budget. They also have saved employee time spent on maintenance, such as changing out the ballast with fluorescent bulbs, or just the general upkeep of their old and aging equipment, and then the less likelihood of a costly emergency repair because they have new high operating equipment in their buildings. There's also been studies showing that once a building goes through an energy efficiency program, there's better air quality and overall comfort improvement for those within the building itself. And lastly, I'd like to touch on, if we want to advance the slide, what I see kind of overall what's contributed to NEAT success. And first, it's been working at a mission-driven organization. So Energy Outreach Colorado is always striving and rethinking how to serve the limited income community. And so it was that kind of thinking that allowed for this kind of out-of-the-box program to figure out a new way to reach the community members that we strive to serve through our other programs. We've also had very strong relationships and partnerships that we've developed over the years, either through utility funders, local cities, government agencies, engineering firms that help us do energy savings calculations when needed, having a strong contractor network, not only that we know has good work ethic, but contractors that can be the face of the program and that we trust to be in nonprofits where sometimes people are very vulnerable, they're in some difficult times, there's sensitive materials or conversations that are happening, and it's working with true professionals in that way that has also led to the success of the program. When the behavior education component was added, that also not only helped save some additional dollars each month, but it also helped people feel more empowered about how they interact with their building and what they could do to make their monthly utility bill truly controllable, how they contribute to that cost and how to bring it down themselves. They also understand their new equipment more, and that's allowed us to feel more confident that when we are doing these efficiency upgrades, that the programmable thermostat will be set the way it was intended, or that the maintenance schedule for the new equipment will carry through so that that equipment is operating as efficiently as possible. We also have access to multiple funding streams. And so what that means is that even in an area of the state where there is not an investor-owned utility with a formal energy efficiency program, because EOC has some of our own private fundraising, we're able to work with any nonprofit in the state regardless of who their utility is. And so we truly are a statewide Colorado nonprofit program. And then anytime we have the opportunity, we're always looking to work with other efficiency programs or other program offerings to really maximize the benefit to the program, or to the individual rather, the nonprofit. And overall, I think flexibility, we will allow, it's about a 9-month process for a nonprofit to go through the program. And so sometimes there's an emergency where their furnace or boiler goes down. We have the flexibility to be able to work on that replacement kind of out of step with the rest of the program so that that immediate real need can be met. And then overall, I mentioned this earlier, but just being an advocate, not only at the Utility Commission or with utilities themselves to get these programs established, but an advocate in the community and advocating for these nonprofits and the low-income community members so that their voice is heard and that we're all together trying to meet their needs and serve them. And with that, I will pass it over to Patrick and Isaac.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. If anyone has any questions for Brooke, please submit those in the question box. And now, Patrick and Isaac, you are up.
Hey, how's it going? This is Patrick Hamlin again, Director of Environmental Programs at the City of Minneapolis. I'm here with Isaac Evans. He's the Energy Contract Manager for the Minneapolis Health Department. And we're going to be talking about the Minneapolis Green Cost Share Program. We run several programs, but we'll just highlight this one today. You say next. Oh, there's flipping it. Okay. So we're going to be going over the program overview, a little program history, talking about how we target the investments and where the funding comes from, talking about some of our partners, and then the outcomes and reporting. And Isaac will cover some of that at the end. So to switch. So the Green Cost Share Program overview, it's a pretty simple recipe. It's taking fees that we take in at the city, at the local level here, and reinvesting them in solutions. We take those incentives and we reinvest back into solar projects, energy efficiency, or pollution reduction projects. We work with partners, similar to Brook's organization, program implementers, local agencies here, Center for Energy and Environment, Energy Smart program for the Chamber of Commerce, and other folks that can offer technical, administrative, or financial assistance. And then we work with, we'll focus on small business and nonprofit today, but we work with multifamily, nonprofit, commercial, industrial, and then we're also moving into the space of looking at like emergency repair, similar to what Brooke was talking about, and then working with some of our lead and healthy homes program, so smaller residential as well. You want to switch? So I'll just quickly go over the green cost share program history. Gonna go next. It was founded on the principle of public-private partnership, working with a local nonprofit called Environmental Initiative, meeting with state agencies like the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Hennepin County, or different counties around here, and then nonprofits, and how we can work together with businesses to solve some of our pollution issues. So I'm gonna switch. Next. And so we started out in dry cleaners. So we actually started in the pollution area. We started working with dry cleaners and helping them switch away from PERC in the dry cleaning industry. It's a hazardous, cancer-causing chemical. And then we found when working with the small business owners that if we had just come up with requirements for them, that we would effectively be putting them out of business. So we came up with a financial tool that could help them switch over their dry cleaning process to a cleaner solvent in the dry cleaning industry. And we actually became the first, this is where we road tested this concept, and we became the first city in the country to completely eliminate PERC from all of our dry cleaners through this program, through this concept. Next. And then in 2014, 2015, we expanded beyond dry cleaners and began working with other small businesses, auto body shops, and then even some of our large industrial emitters to reduce pollution with this concept. Next. And then in 2016, 2017, we began looking at energy efficiency, and we came at it, we're in the health department, so we came at it from a pollution perspective and looking at the pollution caused by energy use or energy creation, and then also from a climate change perspective. And so in that time frame, we worked with about 45 different energy efficiency projects that we funded through the cost share program, and those are some of the example projects off to the right there. Next. In 2018, so all of the work up until this point had been funded through, we have a fee structure that's unique to the city of Minneapolis called the pollution, it's a pollution control registration fee, and that's what we had been reinvesting back in pollution reduction projects. We had began focusing more intensely on energy, and so with decision makers here, with council members, and with our utilities, we raised the franchise fee by 0.5%, and this significantly increased the funds that were available to start reinvesting back into climate change programming that we had started. And then we also, at this time period, started adding solar incentives and multifamily incentives. Next. In 2019, we began trying to focus in. We noticed with some of our pollution spending, we had naturally been working in low income areas just with the nature of the business, with the programs that we've been running. And we noticed with some of our energy efficiency programs, we weren't quite targeting low income folks as much as we would like to, and where the city's mission was in benefiting people in low income situations. And so one of the programs that we began working with is 4D affordable multifamily. It's a tax incentive program. The 4D is a tax incentive program. And then folks that signed up for that for a period of 10 years, we would come into the back end and do a 90% match on energy efficiency, deep energy efficiency retrofits on those properties. And then, during this time, we've been working with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, with the Center of Energy Efficiency, which is a local implementer. Both of those are local implementers through our utilities, and began focusing more intently on small businesses and energy efficiency. We'll go next. And so that we have two areas in Minneapolis off to the right there. It's called the green zones. Those are areas where, if you look at, and you're going to find this in many cities across the country, you look at where the burdens of air pollution are, of racial disparities, of income disparities, and maybe housing issues, where a lot of those issues overlap, tended to be in these two areas in our city. And so these are areas of historical underinvestment and intentional underinvestment, if you look at things like greenlining. And so we took a targeted approach in these two areas to investing more funding, higher percentage matches in those areas, and Isaac will go through some of that as well. And then, so higher percentage matches, and then higher total matches, so higher caps on projects that we, or higher amounts that we'll put out in those areas. And then this year, there's a Great Streets program, and that's similarly looking at areas that have had underinvestment or need investment in our city. And so then we also qualified those areas as having additional incentives. And then again, we have that 4D affordable housing incentive program that we run. And then, like Brooke also said, in working with partners, we're not just out to cut checks. So we really partner with outreach partners who will go out in some of these targeted areas. We view that as just as important as the incentive itself, is going out and being really intentional about where we're doing outreach. And so we do intentional outreach through a program called Energy Technical Assistance Program, that's through a partner group here at the city of Minneapolis. And we do intentional outreach and down to relationship building with small business owners and with nonprofit owners in those areas. Next. And so I mentioned the city relies on two sources of funding. One is our 0.5% utility fee that we charge to both utilities, to Excel and Centerpoint, and then we reinvest those funds back in solutions. And then the other one is our pollution control annual registration fee. And if anyone is interested in more details about those two programs, feel free to reach out to me through the contacts that are given on this presentation. And then we've also had some supplemental funding that's come in through the U.S. Department of Energy, Conservation Block Grant funding, Minneapolis Foundation, which is a local foundation here, and our state pollution control agency. Next. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Isaac to talk about some of the details of the program.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So this is just a table that shows all of our program categories. So I bolded the ones that we're kind of talking about today, but we do offer the solar incentives, and then our innovative pollution reduction, and then auto body incentives. But in terms of energy efficiency, particularly non-residential energy efficiency, it's our energy efficiency and then our refrigeration programs. So as Patrick was mentioning, we have sort of the base rate of what our incentives are across the whole city, and then in our Great Streets, 4D housing, green zones, and sort of other low to moderate income programs, we have kind of lumped those together into what we call like an environmental justice rate. And you can see there in the energy efficiency category, it's 30% of the project's costs up to $30,000. And then for refrigeration, it's 30% again up to $10,000. And that's what we've been trying to focus a lot on this past year, was refrigeration, trying to go into those small convenience stores, liquor stores, bodegas, things like that, where we go out and sort of tell them about all the rebate programs. Next slide, please. And a little bit about the process. So our applications open towards the beginning of the year. So this year we opened on December 1st, and then we do multiple application deadlines. And for our energy efficiency projects, any multifamily, 4 units plus, commercial, nonprofit, or industrial property would qualify in the city of Minneapolis. And the project has to be a new project that hasn't already begun construction. So you can't have, it's not like a rebate where you install it and then you come back to us a year later saying, you know, we've done this project, can we get the match? Because we really want to be on the front end and helping, you know, do the technical assistance with our outreach partners, as well as sort of the rebate coordination and project coordination. So our applications are sent to a third-party nonprofit here called the Great Plains Institute, and they'll gather up panels of energy field experts to help us score applications, looking at things like project payback, project savings, you know, what are they doing for workforce development, and you know, how are the benefits going to low to moderate income communities. And then we make those funding decisions, and we try to prioritize both in the scoring as well as our matches those projects that are located in our environmental justice areas. So like low to moderate income programs, our green zones, and our great streets again. And then you have to set up a contract with the city of Minneapolis. So I do a lot of that. So we'll set up a contract directly with whichever organization is doing the project to make sure that they are getting the cost share match from us. And then once the project is complete, they just submit an invoice and our proof of work documents, things like proof that they got a utility rebate, any before and after pictures, and invoices. And then we pay it out for that. So next slide, please. So these are some of the key partners Patrick was alluding to earlier. We have a program at the state. It's called our Conservation Improvement Program, and that's the state mandated energy efficiency program. So we work a lot with the providers of those utility rebate programs, so similar to organizations like Brooks. So we have the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. They really do focused outreach on businesses in the Twin Cities. And then we have the Center for Energy and Environment, which administers a lot of Excel's rebate programs, and they help out a lot with our multifamily energy efficiency projects. And then we work with the Minnesota Technical Assistance Program, so they will go help our larger industrial customers look at potential pollution reduction project savings or energy efficiency savings, and really do the calculations for them and kind of be there as a resource for them to guide them through like the whole project process. The Environmental Initiative is a big partner for sort of how we got started in this program, and then we have some of our local funders here. So next slide, please. And I took just kind of our most basic metrics, so you guys can look through them from 2015 to 2019. All the 2019 numbers aren't completed yet, and this is just for our non-residential energy efficiency projects. I'll be talking on the next slide about if you're interested in all of our projects. But you can see we have our kilowatt hour savings and our therm savings from projects that have gone through the Minneapolis cost share. And about a third of our projects are located in the green zones. So that's one of our low to moderate income metrics that we like to look at. Other metrics we like to look at are sort of how much pollution reduction or CO2 reduction are we getting per amount of money we're putting into the project. So sort of those cost effectiveness ratios. We look at, you know, the social value of these different pollution reductions. We kind of do some social math to look at, you know, what is the equivalent of cars off the road, sort of how many homes would be powered from solar. Yeah, and a lot of metrics that, if you go to the next slide, you can see I have helped make two sort of reporting out mechanisms. We are a public entity, so we have to report out our program outcomes. So there's two. One is it's a Smartsheet dashboard. That's one of the, just the name of the program we use to track all of our project data, and that's publicly available. I put a link, it looks like it got a little messed up. It was supposed to be in white underneath it. And then there's also a Tableau dashboard on our website, and you can see the link to that is sort of in the bottom right. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick and Isaac, for that great information about your program. With the last few minutes now, we're going to turn it over to a few questions that have come in through the question box. So the first one that I'm going to ask is for Brooke, but this could also apply to Patrick and Isaac as well. Somebody asked, they're curious about the outreach process to, this person said, specifically to onboard more community members to benefit or participate in the program. So do you actively seek out owners that can participate in the program, especially since your program is focused on owners, or do you use word of mouth? So maybe for both of you, how do you go about recruiting for your programs? And we can start with Brooke.
Sure. So for NEEP, it can ebb and flow, whether we just rely on word of mouth and we get enough applicants that way. On average, we do anywhere from 45 to 65 projects a year. And so some of that's through word of mouth, but we also rely on local partners and networks. So for example, in one area of the state, I was trying to get additional participants and reached out to the continuum of care. I know that group is replicated throughout the country. We also utilize our cash assistance agencies. So that's the nonprofits that people are going to get services. We ask them to get the word out through we utilize our contractor network, and we have also asked the utilities when needed to promote the program. Oh, I would also say I recently started working in one area, a newer city, and it was a smaller town and very much more relationship-based. And I found that going and having like a community lunch where I tried to reach out to as many nonprofits as I could find as possible, and then also asking people who I knew there to get the word out for me. To have a one-on-one kind of more personal approach than sending out a mailer or something like that. We have found that mailers and email blasts don't really work in our benefit.
Yeah, this is Patrick. I would say that we found a similar thing. I mean, we do a lot of direct outreach through emails, and we do social media blasts and things like that. But we try to do a lot of relationship building and do relationship building with community partners that are in specific areas of the city. We found one group that we worked with, Lake Street Council. There was a person, Matt Kazinka, who was going out there and meeting and building relationships with businesses. And we found that we had this whole, if you looked at a map of our projects, it was just lit up in the area that he was going out and doing outreach. And so we're actually trying to, instead of trying to clone Matt, we've actually tried to come up with ways that we can replicate that type of outreach. And so he's going out and doing training with different neighborhood groups in that kind of relationship building. Because some of the projects that we have that come in, if we have them coming in 2020, it started in a conversation in 2018 or 2017 where someone went and had a conversation and then, checked back a few months later and really just, kept checking back in with the owner to get the project going.
Great, thank you for that response. Let's try to get one more question in here. So somebody asked for the Minneapolis program, does the program overlap or compete with the IOU program, or do they work together?
I guess I would say overlaps and works together. One of the qualifications is that you qualify for our utilities are XL for electricity and CenterPoint for gas, that you qualify for one of those rebates. So we try to leverage the expertise that the utility brings to the table for, what projects are worthwhile and the energy savings calculations, just because as a city, we don't have the capacity to go out and, decide what sort of technology is best. So we rely on the utilities for that. And in that way, we make sure that we're also getting the customer as much of the available funding as they can, so they can get our match. We'll make sure that they're getting the utility rebate. So they're kind of compounding and not competing.
Great. So unfortunately, we're over time, and there were a lot of great questions that came in. If you have any questions that you would still like answered, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Our emails are up on the current slide. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Maxine to close the webinar.
Yes, so thanks everybody for joining us today. We will be sharing all the slides and a recording of the webinar in the next day or two, and you'll be able to find the recording on ACEEE's YouTube channel. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.